Welcome back to Lab 04, Configuring and Deploying a Virtual Machine. I'm Richard Golson, and let's take a look at the first part of this lab, creating the virtual machine itself. I'm already logged in, as we can see here, into the vSphere client. So let's just skip ahead here and get to the heart of the matter. So I have the data center expanded, and I've selected the ESXi02, which is going to host my new virtual machine. So I'll go ahead and right-click this or go to my actions. Either one will work, and there you can see new virtual machine is the very first option at the top. So we're going to look at how to manually create one. We'll learn later on how we can automate more of this. So you'll note that for creation type, we're creating a new virtual machine, and this guides me through creating that, allowing me to customize the processors, the memory, the network connections, and storage. We're going to take a lot of the defaults. You can see there's other ways to create virtual machines, like deploying from a template, etc. We're just going to create a new one. We'll go ahead and hit the next button. And we want to make sure we name this appropriately. So this one is named VM2-2 as per the instructions. So make sure that you use the appropriate name. It is case sensitive, so I'll use uppercase VM2-2. Make sure that data center is selected. And take note that vCenter can host multiple data centers. So we've only got the one, so we don't need to make any choices here. We're going to go ahead and click the next button and confirm that ESXi02 is still selected, and you'll see that compatibility check succeeded. We could select a cluster and say we don't care which host to launch it onto. We just want to launch it in a cluster. But since this cluster is not configured with any hosts, it tells us right here it doesn't meet compatibility. So I could select either 01 or 02, but we're going to follow the lab instructions and use 02 and hit next. Now you can see in the next step here, I need to select where to place or store the virtual machine files. So this is my selecting the storage step. I will select the local 02-2. Now this is an internal data store that's located on ESXi2. So this was pre-built for us. Usually when you launch or create an ESXi server, any excess storage capacity that's not used by the hypervisor will be set aside as a data store, and that's what this is. Notice that there is 13.34 gigabytes free. We're going to have to make an adjustment later on the hardware to ensure that the virtual machine actually fits within that size, because this is how much space is free on there. Also notice that this is going to be set up with the virtual machine file system 6. So this is going to use the most current VMFS file system. Hit my next button. Also notice that this is going to be compatible with ESXi7, which is what we're currently at. You hit the drop down, you can see there are other versions you could select. Usually go with the highest version possible unless there is a reason not to use it. We'll learn more about clustering later, where that might be a case where you have mixed versions of ESXi in your cluster. The virtual machine will use hardware version 17, which is going to be the most current version, and that's compatible with ESXi7. Hitting the next button, you'll see that we have a guest operating system that's selected by default for Windows. We're going to need to change this to Linux, and you can see that here in the instructions here. We need Linux for the guest OS, and then we're going to select Ubuntu Linux 64-bit for the guest OS version. So changing the guest OS version, hit the drop down, and you're going to need to scroll to the bottom. You will probably notice that this really isn't alphabetically sorted. So I'll just tell you right now, you're going to find the Ubuntu 64-bit at the very bottom here. So I've selected that, and now I can hit next. This is where I'm going to need to make some configuration changes. Now that virtual hardware, if we take a look here, it's indicating that we need to reduce the size of the hard disk on my new virtual machine. That's so that it can fit on that data store right now. I should be able to see that. There we go. If I hover over here, it tells me my disk capacity is greater than the amount available on the data store. If you recall, we only had about 13.34 gigabytes available in that data store. So we're going to reduce this down to 13. The other setting I need to modify here, and you notice this is expanded so I can access this. I need to come down here and change my disk provisioning, so I'm no longer using thick provision, lazy zero. I'm choosing thin provision. We'll learn more about this later, but this in essence ensures that I'm only consuming the amount of space on the data store that I really need. And so in this case, once I install the operating system, it's probably going to use far less than 13 gigabytes, probably something closer to 2 to 4 gigabytes. Therefore, it will only use that much and it won't set aside all 13 gigabytes. It'll allow that to be used by other hard disks. Now I'll go ahead and close this and then come down here, and you'll note that our next setting is to select the data store ISO file. That data store ISO file is going to be used to install the operating system. So I will attach that to a new CD DVD drive. And so I'll expand this setting here and select data store ISO file. And the select file pops up. There is a data store called iSCSI Lun 0. I'll select that. This was pre-configured for the lab. On that data store is a directory called class files. That was also pre-configured for the labs. Within that class files directory, you can see the contents. One of those contents is the Xubuntu desktop ISO. And this is the one I'm selecting here. So make sure you get the right one. It's the last one there. And it's compatible with the Ubuntu operating system that I said I was going to use for the virtual machine. Select the OK. And then a very important button that sometimes we miss, but we need to change the status setting so that this CD DVD will connect at power on, because I'm going to need it to connect so I can use that ISO to install the operating system. Once I've done that, I can hit my next. You'll notice that my virtual machine name is set to VM2-2 as consistent with the lab. Notice the ESXi host is 02. Notice the data store, Ubuntu, a bunch of settings I didn't change, but take note: 1 CPU, 1 gigabyte of memory, 1 NIC, the VM network that it will be connected to. Note the 13 gigabytes here, and let's go ahead and hit the finish button here. And you'll note that my create virtual machine task is completed very fast, because at this stage, I really don't have a virtual machine yet. I haven't installed the operating. I have a virtual machine, but without an operating system installed on there. You'll note that here it is. Now let's take a really quick look at where those files are located. This is not in the lab instructions, but I wanted to show you that. If I go to the data stores, I can see that there is that local 02-2, which is where my files are. And if I click on that and then go to the files section here, there's my VM2-2. And get this to open up. There we go. Double click on it and you can see here's the files. So these are the virtual machine files. There's the VMX file. There's the virtual machine disk. There's a log file, etc. It's using or consuming very little space because I have not installed the operating system yet. We'll see this change later on. All right, that's it for this lab, or excuse me, that's it for this specific video. When we come back, we'll step into installing the guest operating system. I'll see you then.